He hadn't touched a woman in 12 years. And now, the first one to fall into his arms looked like she'd barely survived hell. James Coulter didn't expect much from life anymore. He lived alone in the dry Arizona hills, surrounded by wind, dust, and memories he never spoke about. A small cabin, an old shotgun, and regrets older than the trees around him, that was his world. Then one day, everything changed. She stumbled out of the treeline like death itself was chasing her. Barefoot, filthy, wrapped in nothing but a torn piece of white cloth that might once have been a curtain, or a dress. Her arms were scraped raw, lips cracked, and her eyes carried the kind of fear no one should ever have to know. She collapsed right in front of him. No scream, no name, just 2 whispered words as she clutched that dirty cloth to her chest. "Please, don't." James froze. There wasn't much blood on the outside, but her body shook like she'd crawled out of a fire. He stepped closer. She flinched, but didn't pull away. That's when the cloth slipped just enough for him to see her back. Burns, welts, deep, twisted scars, symbols carved into her skin like someone tried to write their name in pain. It wasn't the wounds that made his stomach turn, it was the way she folded into herself, like she'd learned how to disappear. For a moment, all he saw was Tennessee. The war. The girl he failed to save. He'd walked away once. He'd sworn never again. Slowly, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her like a promise. No questions. No words. Just action. Then he lifted her up and carried her away from whatever hell she'd escaped. For the first time in years, James felt alive. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea the real storm was just beginning. The cabin was warm, but the mountain air still carried a bite. After what she'd been through, even a summer breeze might have felt like ice. He laid her gently on the old cot by the back wall. She didn't speak, just curled inward, clutching his coat like it was the only safe thing left in the world. James didn't ask questions. He didn't want to scare her, and honestly, he wouldn't have known where to start. Instead, he lit a small fire in the stove. Not for heat, but for the sound. The crackling gave the cabin a heartbeat. She barely moved. Her eyes kept scanning the room like she expected someone to burst through the door. Every sound made her flinch. Even the wind against the shutters rattled her nerves. James made coffee, bitter, strong, and older than it should have been, just to keep his hands busy. He sat at the table, watching the fire, glancing at her now and then. Still breathing, still alive, still holding on. Later that night, she stirred. Their eyes met for a brief moment. No words, no emotion, just a flicker of something human beneath all that pain. James nodded, like a man who knew when silence was the only right answer. The next morning, she whispered her first word. Water. He handed her a cup, slow and careful. She drank quietly, then looked at him longer than before. That look didn't say thank you. It didn't ask for help. It said one thing only. I'm still here. James didn't know it yet, but that single word would set off a chain of events no fire, no shotgun, and no silence could stop. She barely spoke that day. Just nods, short answers, cautious glances, like she was still deciding if he was real. That afternoon, while James sat on the porch carving a broken chair leg, she stepped outside and sat beside him. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, quietly, almost to herself, they used to make me clean their boots. James kept carving, just nodded. She told him about a mining camp hidden off the map. A place where people were worked until they broke, and punished when they did. She'd tried to escape twice. The first time, they broke her nose. The second time, they carved her back like rawhide. He didn't ask how she escaped the third time. As the sun dipped behind the pines, James heard something that made his blood go cold. Hoofbeats. Fast. Coming up the ridge road. He stood, grabbed his shotgun, and motioned her inside. She froze, then moved instantly, like she'd been trained for moments like this. The man who rode up didn't look like a cowboy. More like a drunk banker in a fancy vest, with a greasy mustache hiding cruel eyes. He called her by name. Ellie Rose. You got one chance to come back quiet. James stepped off the porch. She's not going anywhere. The man smirked. Ain't your choice, old-timer. James cocked the shotgun. Not aimed, just enough to remind him whose land this was. The man spat in the dirt and rode off. But that look in his eyes said one thing clearly. He'd be back. And he wouldn't be alone. 3 days passed. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind that waits. James stayed alert, cleaning his shotgun over and over like the world was about to end. Then it happened. Late afternoon. The air went still. 3 riders came up the ridge. Not ranchers. Not law. One of them was the same man from before. This time, he didn't come to talk. Step aside, old man. James didn't move. One rider's hand drifted toward his belt. James fired. The man dropped screaming, blood pouring from his leg. The others froze. That's when a calm voice cut through the air. I'd think real hard about your next move. A man stepped out from the tree line. Badge on his chest. Rifle low. Abram Hale, James's old war friend, now sheriff of the territory. She's under my protection now. They left. Slow, but they left. Later, Abram smiled and said, you send a note that smells like gunpowder and regret. I know it's serious. After that, the cabin felt different. Lighter. Ellie stopped hiding. She still had nightmares, still flinched at loud sounds, but she sat at the table now. Drank coffee. Asked questions. Brought in wildflowers. James swept the porch for the first time in years. They didn't talk about love. Didn't name it. One night, she asked, you ever think some people aren't meant to save others, just give them space to save themselves? James nodded. That was enough. 2 people. 1 cabin. Slow healing. And the understanding that sometimes, all it takes is one moment of not walking away.